We are back, everybody. Another time-lapse model build video part 1, and this one we will be looking at the construction of this, the Revell F-14A Tomcat. Now this is basically a rebox of the old monogram one from 1981, I believe. Early 80s is when this mold was initially done. The copyright on the box is 2009. That's just when this particular boxing was released. The plastic itself has a copyright of 1993. And of course, they've got the copyright stamped on the outside of the plastic, and there's giant sink marks there, which will need some work, but not too sure why it says 1993 unless there was a modification made to the molds. I don't have an older box to compare against, but yeah, this is as far as I can tell by looking it up online, this is just a rebox of the original, as I said, 1981-ish model. The molds are starting to suffer. There's quite a bit of flash coming out on some of the parts. There's a massive mold seam right down the middle of that. I may or may not fix. I might leave it in some sections of the fuselage because it looks like a panel line, but I'll probably clean it up here in the cockpit section just to clean that up. But yeah, there's lots of like flash on the tails here where the speed brake sticks out. So it's gonna be a bit of work on this. It's definitely an older boxing. There's not a lot of parts to it, as you can clearly see. It's a pretty simple model. My plans for this is going to be completed using, I don't have the decal sheets out right now, the Caracal Prototypes boxing, Prototypes edition of their F-14 decals, doing this up as prototype number 3. And prototype number 3 was used in the asymmetric wing test. So basically the F-14, as most of you out there probably already know, was a swing wing fighter. So the wings were movable. I hate these massive sprues. These massive sprue connection points are just absolute garbage, but ooh, some release, mold release agent on that one. There's a lot of people who actually wash their sprues. I haven't got in that habit, but I do tend to wipe the model down with an alcohol swab before I start painting, and that usually solves most of the issues with oil. But yeah, these big sprue gates are absolute garbage. I could never understand why companies went to these things. They are, I mean, it's mostly monogram. I guess the idea is it's just a heavy part, but they're so big and they tend to tear just like that. They tend to tear the plastic when you cut them, and then it ends up looking like garbage, and you got to spend all kinds of effort to clean it up, especially on a raised panel line kit. It is not easy to correct that. Anyways, back to my story. So prototype 3, the F-14 was a swing wing fighter. And so they had to plan for the eventuality that one of the wings would either extend or retract and the other wouldn't. So effectively a failure of one of the wing fold mechanisms, and that would end up giving it an asymmetric wing. And they needed to show, Grumman needed to prove to the Navy that the aircraft was able to be operated in that condition. Now this model is designed, as you can tell with these gears, the model is designed to have the wings not glued in, and as you move one, they both operate, and you can adjust the wings after construction. I guess that's probably closer to how it should be. Right, so that's the idea. You'll build the model, and then afterwards you get to sit here as a kid and play with it. Now, like I said, I built one of these when I was a kid, and I can tell you it was actually kind of cool to be able to adjust the wings after the fact. Yeah, I don't have it in right. Where's that hinge point? Hinge point. There we go. There. Something kind of like when it wants to work right. I am just doing this super quick and dirty, so I'm not, anyways, I can't get this done without having it actually assembled. This is For someone who's supposed to be able to assemble this as like an 8-year-old or something, it's not the easiest to assemble. Actually, that being said, I think there's supposed to be a connecting rod or something. Anyways, long story short, Grumman had to prove to the Navy that this aircraft could fly in an asymmetric format. So the test was actually completed with the aircraft flown in an asymmetric condition, which I could probably actually glue the wings together in the exact layout it needs to be put in. Something like that. But yeah, so it was flown in an asymmetric wing situation where one wing was retracted and one wing was extended. See, I think my issue is I'm supposed to assemble it with the wings fully out. And then it should, whatever. Anyways, it was flown with one wing retracted and one wing extended. And that is how I'm going to build it. On a stand, one wing back, one wing out, in the prototype scheme, gloss gray over gloss white with a whole bunch of red panels on it. So that's what I'm going to do. So it's going to be interesting. Now there's a bit of work I need to do with this, a couple of modifications. One of them is on one of the missile racks that glue under the wings here. It has the sparrows molded into it, and I don't want the sparrows installed, so I'm going to have to modify that, cut the sparrows off, and clean up the pylon a little bit to make it all work. You can kind of really see some of the struggles I'm going to have with this kit in terms of fit. There's a lot of flash, sanding, warpage, so a lot of work I'm going to have to put in to really clean up some seams on this as well. The landing gear are going to be retracted, so I have to glue in all of the gear doors and get those as close to perfect as I can get them. Just a lot of cleanup. Some work up here is going to need to get done. All these panel lines cleared up. I'm going to have to figure out the whole raised panel line situation because I'm absolutely not rescribing this thing, but I need to make sure the seams look decent. So there'll be quite a bit of cleanup pre and post assembly to make sure that this lines up the way I want it to. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a work. Bit of a slog, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to look really good. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even want to just sit together. It's going to cause a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. This panel here has to be glued in place. That's going to make a big difference. Anyways, so there's a lot of work along that. So the fuselage will need a lot of work to clean up. Gear doors need to be glued in. Those need to be cleaned up. Those missile racks will need to be modified. And then on the wings, because the wings were in an asymmetric situation, if you can imagine, if you've got wings that are basically mounted like this on the airframe, yes, so this one's going to come back and mount something like that. This wing is going to create significantly more lift than this wing. So in order to counteract that lift, they were holding a lot of right stick to keep it level, and that means the aircraft doesn't have ailerons, it has full span flaps with spoilerons. So I'm going to need to modify this kit slightly. I'm going to cut out the flaps and the spoilerons, and then I'm actually going to glue the flaps to the lower half of the wing, glue this forward section to the wing, get all that all cleaned up, and then recreate some of these pieces in here, the hinge mechanisms for the flaps, with some strip styrene. And then I'm going to go ahead and just create the spoilerons with some strip styrene, and just the slightest amount. I'm not going to have them all the way up like spoilers or anything. I'm going to have just the slightest amount of angle so that when you look at it, you'll clearly see that these are down and these are up. So that's the step I'm going to do now. So I'm going to stop talking and start. I'll also have to figure out closer to completion where the CFG on this kit is. Once I get the wings, I just got to drill a hole effectively. I'll need to drill a hole to mount the stand, but I'm going to wait until I figure out closer to what C of G is going to be, because I want to keep the model somewhat balanced. So I'll deal with that later. Anyways, first thing I want to do is stop talking. We'll jump to a time lapse, and I'm going to start cutting out this wing. once I got that the spoilers cut out, you can see I go ahead, I rebuild everything. I add the structure back in based off the other wing, and then I cut out all of the individual spoilers. I get those installed in the proper orientation, and then basically don't do anything with it again until much later in the process. But at least that I got it out of the way early. I usually like to do the major surgery early in the build, get it out of the way, and then the rest of it is just kind of a standard build sequence after that. And then once I get all that wing done, I move on to the cockpit just like any other build. You'll see here I start building up the ejection seats, get the tub, get everything painted, and then get some weathering done. And then near the end of that, you'll also see me start working on the pilots. And I don't normally put pilots in my builds. I did with this one because in a prototype format, they would have been using like a bright orange style like test pilot suit. And I felt like that was a nice visual pop inside the cockpit. So I did go ahead and add the pilots. You'll see me build them up and paint them and whatnot as the build progresses. But yeah, cockpit, pretty much standard out of the box. Didn't do a lot of detailing. You're not going to see a whole lot in there. So pretty much standard. I'm taking the opportunity to get the gear doors glued in. As I am building this with the gear up, I have to glue the doors in, and this kit wasn't really designed to have the gear doors built up. They don't fit very well, especially here on the nose section. I'm using some styrene on the back side to add a bit of structure and ensure all the doors line up properly. The main gear doors weren't too bad, just a little bit of sanding and filling, but these nose ones definitely needed some work to get everything to look good. And I mean, not perfect by any means. I didn't really spend the time to make it look perfect. I'm going ahead and kind of building this as a 3-foot model just because of the quality of the kit being an older kit. But anyways, it looks good. It plays the part, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. As you can see here with the amount of cleanup and putty I'm doing, that definitely needed a bit of work. The other thing you'll notice, I've added some tape in some strategic areas. The kit does have raised panel lines. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. So I'm using some of this tape just to cover some of those raised details that I want to save. This way, while I'm sanding, I don't sand those details off. And it just gives a little bit of visual busyness to the surface versus sanding it all off. I have no interest in rescribing this kit, so I'm just masking off some of those details, and then I can go ahead and clean up and sand down all of the gear doors, blend everything in nicely. here you can see me starting to glue the two halves together. I'm working my way slowly around the airframe. I started at the nose where the cockpit is. I made sure that was lined up nice. That's the main seam you're going to see. So I did my best to get those lined up, and then I just work around all the seams, gluing everything down, making sure I have a nice tight bond in preparation for moving on to the next steps. As you can see, there's just more puttying. Once I get everything assembled, I got to clean up a little bit more along those gear doors, also the sides of the fuselage where those seams are. Along the tail, there's some sink marks I think I mentioned early on in the build on those horizontal stabs, as well as a little bit of the seam along that rear fuselage. Also the intakes. I didn't really talk about that earlier as I installed the intakes, but I went ahead and got that done, painted the trunking white, glued them on. Quite a bit of cleanup had to go on around those rear seams, so you can see there I'm cleaning all that up, getting everything prepared for a coat of primer so I can check on it. Also, you'll notice when I'm spray paint, I'm priming, quote unquote, with some white paint at this point. It's also, I'm building up some layers. White paint is very hard to lay down smooth, so I'm just building up a couple of layers of white paint as I'm going so that the final coats go down a little bit easier. so here we are. I figured it's a good time to do a quick kind of overall update on where we are with this. I'm almost at the point when I can start priming. So I've got most of these seams cleaned up. Excuse me. Few little things I'm still gonna have to touch up here and there, especially on these sides. Where is my sandpaper? This kit is, you can obviously see the age of this kit when you're building it. It is not designed for a high detail build. Seams are really, really bad. The raised panel lines make cleanup really hard. I'm basically just ignoring the raised panel lines at this point. Whatever I end up with is what I end up with. But back here, everything feels good. Same up here, a little bit of touch up on that needed. These sides are gonna need a little bit more, but I wanna wait till I get some, as I said, some primer on it to get a good look at what state they're actually in. Just clean this corner up here. Anyways, main reason I'm talking on the video right now is just to say that I'm gonna start masking the canopy. That's kind of where I'm being held back right now. So I've glued the canopy on. I filled all the seams with white glue. I'm gonna mask it, hit it with some flat black, and then I can start to see what those seams look like. And then as I start cleaning up over here and I start priming, I'm not ruining the interior of the cockpit with overspray. I'm also down to the absolute last of my masking tape, which is a little annoying. So I'm gonna have to do a hobby shop run at some point this week and restock on that. How am I on the tin stuff? Yeah, I'll save the 10 mil. I'll use my 6 mil on this one, but I definitely have to go out and stock up on some masking tape. So that'll be a job for later in the week. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead, mask this cockpit. I'm using the standard procedure I've done for most of my canopies the past little while, where I don't have the pre-cut masking sets. It's just use straight Tamiya masking tape, mask along the canopy frames, and then use a sharp X-Acto blade to trim excess. Pretty easy way to do it, and as long as you use a relatively sharp blade and you're not too hard on the blade, you can usually do something similar, close to what you'd get with a preset mask. I need to get a good set of tweezers here. Here we go. Yeah, you can get pretty close, especially on something like this. It's not overly complicated. Something like a World War II aircraft, like a heavily framed, you know, something like a P-51B or something like that, like an ME-109. You can run into issues with the heavily framed cockpit, but on something like this, where it's very minimal amounts of framing, this is almost the same as doing a pre-cut mask set, so not terribly worried. So anyways, I'm gonna go ahead, get all of this done, and we'll jump back in here after I get the masking down, take a look at what all of the, once I get the masking down, and I should say, a coat of flat black around the canopy. We'll jump back in and take a look at how things look. So here we go. here you can see once I have those lower missile rails installed, it's not going to carry any weapons, but this airframe did have those all installed during its test sequence. So I got those glued on. I then go ahead and start drilling that hole, pretty much centered it on the missile rails, simply because it had enough space where that would fit there. So I got that prepped, got the hole prepped, cut the rod, got the base all ready to go. And you'll also notice I got a bit of black paint on the canopy. That is just the frames that you'll see from the inside. So it looks like the canopy frames are painted black. That's, again, a pretty standard thing I do when I do my canopies. And then pretty much the last thing I'm doing here, right before I'm wrapping this up, other than doing a bit of Mr. Surfacer just to clean up around those intakes, is the missile pylons. I have to cut off the sparrows that are pre-molded, and then you'll see me glue them all together. I eventually clean all that up in part 2, so you'll get to see that a little bit later, but I get these glued together and prepared to move on to the next stage, which would be paint. Here we are, folks, at a good point, in my opinion, to wrap up part 1. There's not much left to do on this other than final paint. I primed it with some Tamiya primer, and I had some issues. I might have mentioned it in an earlier clip of this video. It was the end of the can, and I didn't realize it was the end of the can, and it kind of went all splurty on me and made a bit of a mess. However, I've touched up with some of the Vallejo primer, and I'm pretty happy with it. All of the seams look decent enough to live with. Everything's looking really, really good. Apologies if I randomly stop talking. My cat is somewhere down here and I don't know where she is. Anyways, yeah, so it's pretty much ready for paint. This is gonna be a fun one because the whole belly needs to be white along with a bunch of the top surface, and white is a really hard color to paint. So I tried to prime with Tamiya primer because I like it. And as I said, I ran into some issues. So it's gonna take quite a bit of work to get the white painted on quite nicely on this, but it is what it is. Anyways, what you're seeing is pretty much the final kit. All I really have to do is make a longer pitot tube for the nose as it was a test bird. I'm probably just gonna get a piece of syringe or something for that. Not quite sure yet. Maybe even just a piece of wire, make it work. The only real thing I still have to do other than the pitot tube and the hook is the weapons pylons. These here, which are gonna mount here. I've modified them. The kit had the sparrows hard mounted on them, molded into the kit. I don't want the sparrows installed, so I've removed them. I am gonna have to do a little bit of repair down here, some sheet styrene, fill in these gaps, and then clean that all up. But again, I'll do all that in the part 2 of the video. Paint scheme for this, I don't know if I have the instructions, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before. It's gonna be the standard early Navy scheme, white on the belly, gray on the top. The white will come across at the stabs and the elevators, all the moving surfaces, the rudders, all that kind of stuff. It's also going to be the prototype, hence the asymmetric wing. Prototype number 3 did do a flight in this configuration, which is what I am recreating. So as a prototype, it also had a whole bunch of like red panels on it, parts of the stabs, wings, tail, nose. The strakes under here were all painted as a red kind of test scheme. So I got to do that as well. I can't remember if it's day glow or orange or red. So that's going to be a down the road figuring out. I also have the base figured out. It's just a piece of acrylic rod in a base. I still have to prep and sand all of this, but it fits on here like so. And you have a really neat, when you get the stand in the right orientation, there you go. It sits there quite nicely and you have a pretty cool looking F-14 sitting there in like this test configuration. I'm going to give it a little bit of a left lean. You'll see I did the modification as well if you've been following along to have the spoilerons on the right wing raised as this side created more lift and the plane wanted to roll to the left. So they had to counteract that with a lot of right aileron input to keep it level. So I want to have it in a little bit of a left bank, just trying to recreate that look. So when I glue it on, I'll kind of hold it in the position. You can use things like white glue and everything and get it to kind of sit in the orientation you want while the epoxy hardens. So that's going to be that. Just taking a quick look at instructions just so everyone can see what page we're on. I really dislike these early monogram ones, but moving my way across, you can see I'm pretty much here. Step 10 is the pitot tube and 11 is the resto hook, which as I said I'm doing later. I do have the exhaust cans painted steel. I just have to weather them a little bit. So they are also ready to be installed after paint. 12, like we're, you know what I mean? We got to make our way down here quite. Here's the weapons, step 24, which I am working on. And then you turn the page and we're basically at canopy and final. So this is done. As I said, other than these weapons, the hook, the pitot tube, and the exhaust cans, it is done. I still will need to do a little bit of painting back here afterwards, mask it off and do the bare metal sections at a later date, but that will be later. So part 2 is coming up. So it's gonna be a little bit till I get to that point. I still have quite a bit of work to do on this as it stands. What in the hell is that? Weird. Anyway, I still have quite a bit to do to get to that point, but here we are. So if you want to see more kind of step-by-step updates, keep an eye out on those monthly what is on my desk updates. I will be doing some of those updates on there, and you'll see this progress as we go month to month to month, and then part 2 will be the final wrap-up. So that is that. Let's get into it. Part 2 coming up in a little while, or if this is down the road, you can jump on it right off the bat. Just click the button and you'll end up seeing it. So we'll get into part 2, paint and weathering and decals and all that other fun stuff. So that is part 1. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.